Good evening again, everyone. Again, thanks for joining us for our midweek connection. Thanks to the worship team for leading us in worship. Hey, normally on Thursday nights, we kind of go through a book study. We've done the book of Jonah together, and we're moving into a different season of starting a first Wednesday services, as we explained in the announcement time. So tonight, we thought we'd take this last week and just talk about something that we think is going to set us up to move into this ministry year during this unique season, because things are starting, right? Like fall feels like things kind of starting to kind of kick off, even though things still are kind of a little crazy and a little weird, and we have to do things differently. Kids are going to be going back to school. Some kids are, some aren't. Some people are homeschooling their kids for the first time. Some kids are doing virtual schooling. Some of our jobs still look a bit different. But we're going to be doing new things at church during this season. MVRK, our youth ministry, is starting up, and we're going to be doing that, but it's going to look a little different. And we're going to start in-person gatherings again, but they're going to look a little different than what they've normally done. We're going to do renew groups again, but they're going to look a little different. But we're still the church, and we still want to worship together. We still want to live for Him together, and so we're going to do what we can. And so we thought we'd take this night and kind of set ourselves up as we move into that season of doing ministry in this unique time, which would normally be what we've said be our fall ministry kickoff, and kind of where we're ramping up to do things. So as I thought about that, like, hey, what do we need to know as we kind of move forward in this time? And this idea of flexibility kind of came to mind. This idea of this principle of being flexible. And see, I believe that embracing flexibility is one of the key things that will help us move through this unique season. And Christians should be marked by being flexible. Being flexible can help our relationship with God. Being flexible can improve our relationships with others, with our friends, with our family, with our church family. Being flexible can help our witness to the rest of the world. We can actually make Jesus great by the way that we respond to situations. We reflect who He is. Right? Being flexible can either reflect Jesus in a positive light, or it can hurt our testimony for Him. It can drastically affect our relationships, like we said. See, I also believe that it can be a key factor in our witness. It has to be. So tonight, I just want to give you 5 prayers of action that can help us be more flexible as we live for Jesus. So, because we kind of talk about this concept of being flexible, and well, how do we actually do that? Well, the first thing I think is to actually start by asking God to help build this into our life, to help us be people that are more flexible. I think there's all kinds of examples from the scriptures, and I think we should be asking Him on a regular basis, hey, help me do this. And I think there's 5 specific prayers that we can be praying on a constant basis in a normal rhythm that can help us move through this unique season and live for Jesus as best as we can. And so, but before we get into that, I want to make sure that we're on the same page of what we're talking about when we say being flexible. So I found this definition of being flexible in a Christian context, and it says this, flexibility is being open to the plans and ideas of others and willing to be instructed and challenged to change for the better. You have to be willing to bend, if not, your relationships can break. This character will help us see the big picture, how people and events are all interlinked with a sovereign God that controls. In this way, we can see that our plans and ways are not autonomous. They're not disconnected, which is a key thing to know. We can trust God, go with His flow, and make the most of the opportunities and relationships. Therefore, we will be able to make changes in our plans and ideas to accommodate others, to serve others, and fit the situation centered upon scriptural precepts. I think that's a great definition of flexibility within a Christian context. See, sometimes God is going to push you to be flexible to serve others. Sometimes God is going to push you to be flexible to actually mature your faith, to grow you. Sometimes He's going to push you to be flexible to get to know Him better. He's actually going to put you in situations where you're going to have to kind of go with the flow, be a little flexible, so that way you can actually understand who He is and what He's doing a bit better. I can't think of a better time in my lifetime that we all need to rest within the truth of who God is and what he's done for us. See, we need to make it clear that when we're talking about being flexible, we're talking about a bunch of other stuff. See, people will change, places will change, situations will change. In fact, everything changes except for God. God and his word are unchanging. And see, we need to be flexible in all those other situations, and the way that we can, I think as Christians, we're actually set up to be the most flexible people because we're grounded in a God who never changes. We follow a God who is never changing, who gives us a word that is never changing, who gives us the gospel truth, the fact that he sent his son to die on a cross and to rise again, and by placing our life under him, by submitting to him and accepting him as a Lord and Savior in our life and being his disciple, we actually restore our relationship. We get to live for him forever. This gospel truth is never changing. And so when everything else is changing, right? I can't think of a better time in my life where being flexible is a key principle because everything right now around us is crazy, right? We're living in the middle of a pandemic. There's justice issues. There's racial tension. There's just all kinds of stuff happening. But we live our lives grounded on a God that is never changing, who gives us a word that is never changing. So I believe because of that, we're actually set up to be the most flexible people because we have that grounded truth. This truth, see, a mature faith, here's a quote for you. A mature faith should produce disciples who are fluent in flexibility because they are grounded in the never-changing truth of God. I'll say that again. A mature faith should produce disciples who are fluent in flexibility because they are grounded in the never-changing truth of God. So, how do we do that? Well, so here are 5 specific prayers that I think we need to be praying and asking God for to grow that in us. And the first one is this: pray for God to remind you to be humble while you trust in him. Pray for God to remind you to be humble while you trust in him. In Psalm 25:9, it says this: he guides the humble in what is right and teaches them his way. You see, we need to ask God to remind us to remain humble, teachable, and available for whatever he directs us to do, whatever he says to us, whatever experiences he throws our way. When we are humble, our trust factor increases. I often find that when I'm struggling with being humble, it's also the time that I'm struggling being the most teachable. Our pride and our teachability are kind of interconnected. When I'm operating out of my pride, I'm not that teachable. But when I'm operating out of humbleness, when I'm actually submitting myself, when I'm actually recognizing the low place that I should hold and the high place that God should hold, I become that much more teachable. I become that much more flexible. So the first prayer of action that we need to be constantly praying is, hey, God, remind me to be humble today. So that way, when I meet situations where I come across experiences, when I deal with a relationship in a certain thing, that I can be flexible, that I can actually honor you with my actions and how I respond to it. To truly be flexible while living for Jesus, we have to be aware of and actively following his direction. And the only way we can do that is if we're humble. So number 2, the second prayer is this: pray for God to help you follow Christ's example of ultimate flexibility. Matthew 26:42, Jesus is praying, and he's praying before he goes to the cross, and he says these words a second time. He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." See, we know that Jesus was fully God and fully man. This is one of the core Christian tenets, core kind of orthodox Christian tenet, where we believe that Jesus was God, but he was also human, fully God, fully man. Jesus experienced suffering. He experienced agony. He experienced stress, just like all of us. See, Jesus knew what was coming, what was ahead of him. He knew the cross was ahead of him. We know that Jesus really suffered, and we know the cross was ahead of him. And here in this prayer, we see him aligning his humanness underneath the perfect will of the Father, which is a marvelous thing. He is providing the ultimate example of what we are called to do as Christians, which is to die to self, to fulfill what he's called us to do. And obviously, Jesus was called for the ultimate sacrifice. He's basically saying, if this is the way it has to be, then so be it. If this is the way that I got to do it, then so be it. This cup can't be taken away from it, then I'm going to drink of it. What would happen if we consistently prayed for God to help us follow this example from our Savior? If we thought of the way that Jesus died to his human self, and he aligned himself with the perfect will of the Father, fully God, fully human, experiencing that sacrifice, that agony, but yet walking to the cross. Because if this is the way that it has to be, then this is the way that it has to be. What if we operated during this season right now? How would we show the rest of the world Jesus? When we said, hey, if this is the way it has to be, this is the way it has to be. I'm going to choose to worship God. I'm going to choose to honor him. I'm going to choose to walk in the manner that he's called me to walk. Again, because my life is founded on an unchanging God and an unchanging truth. I can do that during this time. What if we prayed for God to show us how to live by the example of Jesus? Number 3. Pray for God to show you how interruptions can be used for his purposes. And I think this is a huge one. Interruptions can be used for his purposes because, right, a lot of times interruptions are just plain annoying. They're frustrating. They can be infuriating. But interruptions can be from God. Romans 1:13 says this, I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I planned many times to come to you, but have been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I might have harvest among you, just as I have had among the other Gentiles. See, now the Apostle Paul here is writing the book of Romans, and the Apostle Paul is expressing his desire while at the same time embracing the obstacle or the interruption that gets in the way of what Paul wants to do. Paul, out of anyone, knows about these things, right? Firsthand experiences from things of being imprisoned or getting shipwrecked or thrown out of cities. Like he knows things that don't go his ways when plans change, interruptions, problems, obstacles. See, and the things that what sometimes seem as inconvenience or interruptions in our lives, they're being used by God to accomplish something better. Well, all we see is the interruption that's taking us away from what we see and what we're going after. And a lot of times we don't take a step back to say, okay, wait a second, maybe this interruption is actually showing me something better. And it doesn't always feel better, but maybe it's better because God says it's better. God has something else for you. God wants you to walk in a different direction. Sometimes that means dying to self more. It's not always easy, but it's better because it's from him. It's good, it's holy because it's from him. But a lot of times those interruptions, those obstacles, those things that get in our way, that's all we see, and we get engrossed by them. We're taken back by them. We get angry, frustrated, stressed out, whatever it is. Sometimes those are little things like you can't find your car keys. Sometimes those are big things like you just got a health diagnosis and it's interrupting your life and it's pushing you in a different direction. But what if we prayed, hey God, the interruptions that kind of take me off course, could I see them as maybe things that are pointing me in a different direction for you? Excuse me. Prayer number 4. Ask God to use your disappointments to show you more of who he is. And it's kind of linked to the third one as we're praying for interruptions. This is saying, hey, God, use my disappointments, because sometimes interruptions turn into disappointments, right? Ask God to use your disappointments to show you more of who he is. Job 42, 1-3 says this. I know that you can do all things. No purposes of yours can be thwarted, you asked. Who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. Hear those words from Job. Now, if you've never read the book of Job, I would encourage you to do it. Right? Job, out of anybody, knows a life of disappointments. Here's a guy who's a good man from everything we know, and God allows Satan to come and test him, and he gets tons of stuff taken away from him. But yet, by the end of the story, we know that Job says words like this. Who am I? I don't understand the things that you do, things that are more wonderful, things that are better for me. It's a crazy outlook. This guy at the end of the day was able to say those words, things that are too wonderful for me to know. See, we need to ask the Lord to help us become more trusting and obedient, even when we do not understand exactly the process that God is taking us in. A lot of times, just like we get caught up with the initial interruption, becomes disappointment, and then we live in that because we're not really all about the process that's happening. We don't understand it. We don't get it. We don't see it. And Job can talk to this better than anybody else. But yet he's still able to say these words that we just read. A prayer for us should for us to be able to still worship him, for us to be able to take a step back out of that process and to trust him, to trust God, even in the midst of our disappointments. To trust him. That should be a prayer that we're constantly praying. And it's a key to actually being able to foster healthy flexibility in our life, which ultimately points to him. And the last one is this. Pray for God to show you and our church alternative ways to be on mission and to accomplish his plans. And again, this is another big one. Pray for God to show you and our church collectively as a whole alternative ways to be on mission and to accomplish his plan. See, we constantly see stories of people in scriptures who are being flexible with this, or being flexible while on mission with God, while accomplishing God's plan. Right? We can just look at Jesus' parents, Mary and Joseph. Mary and Joseph, their whole life changed. Talk about an interruption and then a process, a different course to go on than what they were probably expecting. The virgin birth, having to get married the way they did. They had to be flexible to help accomplish God's plan. They had to trust him through the process. We see the Apostle Paul have to deal with shipwrecks and imprisonment. We see his disciples drop everything to follow him. Talk about being flexible. What if our church lived like these people? What if our church was marked by stories like this? Where a call from God came and we were flexible enough, we were trusting enough, we were humble enough to just follow him, to do something different than what we saw coming. And see, this can apply to our lives now as well, and our ministry life, both personally and in the church. Because as Christians, we develop patterns and habits, and we kind of do things the same ways. But right now, we're in a season where we have to do everything different. And can we adapt? Can we look for alternative ways to honor and to worship him? Can we look for alternative ways to be the church? Can we look for alternative ways to be on mission and to tell people about Jesus than what we're normally used to? Can we allow the direction to change? Or are we going to let our pride get in the way? Or are we going to be caught up in the interruption? Or are we going to be caught up in the disappointment? Or are we going to be caught up by not liking the process? We're actually in a season where we're set up to shine a light so bright because we're reflecting who Jesus is because of how we're meeting this situation. As we move into the fall, as we move into the fall season and we start to do things a little bit differently as a church, and maybe you're doing things differently in your personal life, your family, would you ask God to reveal you more ways to be flexible? Maybe this is kind of a sixth prayer. We're just kind of ongoing, like, hey, God, reveal to me things that I need to kind of be flexible in. Reveal to me areas where I need to be humble so I can increase my teachability level. Reveal to me ways where interruptions that I've been stressed out about, that I've been worried about, that maybe you're using to point me in a different direction. Reveal to me places where I've been caught up in the process and maybe I need to take a step back and need to trust you more. Reveal to me ways personally where I can honor and worship you more. And then collectively as a church. God, would you reveal to our church as a whole ways that we can worship you, honor you, and be on mission for you differently because we have to during this time. So the key of flexibility, it's a way for us to be mature Christians and to honor him and to be on mission for him.